world's best cup of coffee, but I will say that they do appear to put a lot of care into their hamburgers. So Phil Romano went out on an old bank in San Antonio, Texas, and converted it into a restaurant that was selling the world's greatest hamburgers, or at the very least, a higher quality hamburger when compared to most fast food restaurants. The original name, I love it, he called it Freddy Fuddrucker, obviously dropping the Freddy part early on. Could you imagine someone having the legal name Freddy Fuddrucker? That would be incredible. And to be clear, it was never someone's actual name. It was rumored to be inspired by a fictional airline called the. It was never someone's actual name. It was named to try to catch people's attention. About a year and a half later, Romano opened the second Fuddruckers in Houston, Texas, and about a year and a half after that, they had their first change in ownership. 1983 had a public stock offering that raised the money that they needed to start opening so many more restaurants.
It's working.
Phil Romano did remain the majority owner, but this was like the start of him removing himself further and further away from the company. In 1985, he stepped down from the CEO position, and by the end of that decade, he left the board of directors and sold most of his ownership in favor of moving on to start new restaurant concepts. The most notable one of those would probably be
This is awesome. Okay, that was quick.
Now becoming a well-known brand because they had the resources to open new restaurants in new cities, but maybe even more importantly, they were utilizing a franchising system. That's basically where others pay them for the rights to operate locations and brand in their food. All things that helped Fuddruckers grow to over 100 locations within the next 4 years. They had been a little fast. I would consider that to be their first stumble. They were overextended and started to lose money, but they laid off some of their staff and sold some company-owned locations to the franchisees, and that loosened things up enough to reverse the trend. Their next change in ownership happened in 1988 when they merged with a company called Dhaka International. Now, that company would specialize in food service contracts. Specifically, they were one of the country's largest operators of cafeterias that have been in places like universities and hospitals. The two of them seemed like a good fit because combining would make them more efficient in terms of cafeterias and operations. One of the big attractions of Fuddruckers has always been their toppings. Similar to a cafeteria style, they give you a plain burger and then you take it over to that area and put all the toppings you want on it. It's a fun way to do it. It gives the customer more power of exactly what they're eating, and it saves money because there's never been a need to employ servers. Dhaka was in charge of Fuddruckers for almost a decade, and during that time, the brand became considerably more well-known, almost doubling in size, approaching 200 locations. In fact, in the mid-1990s, there were a dozen Home Depots that contained a smaller version of Fuddruckers called Fuddruckers Express inside of them. They didn't last long because the whole idea turned out to be a disaster. Really, everything for Fuddruckers started going wrong around that time. Some of it was a similar issue. Opening locations too fast, causing them poor decisions in real estate, but also they believe that there was consumer confusion over the Fuddruckers' core concept of the world's greatest hamburger. Let me explain that a little further. I would say that the best argument that can be given for these actually being the world's greatest hamburger is the fact that they are so fresh. I mean, objectively, I think a hamburger much fresher than this. Going all the way back to the first hamburgers at that first location, they have been known for having a section labeled butcher shop, a section labeled bakery, not to mention.
Oh my god.
I think Phil Romano realized you're going to make such a bold claim, you have to back it up with some evidence. So with all of this going on, people could see that the meat was cut and ground daily at the restaurant. The buns were baked from scratch daily at the restaurant. All the vegetables were visibly fresh. But by the middle of the 1990s, they stopped emphasizing all of this stuff, partially by changing the layout of the restaurant so that all of a sudden, the world's greatest burger was starting to seem more like an empty claim. And on top of that, the investors feared that Dhaka was having their attention pulled in too many different directions, given the fact that they also owned the cafeteria business and 2 other restaurant chains called Champs and Great Bagel and Coffee. The next change in ownership is a very brief technical change. In 1997, Dhaka International basically split apart. They sold their cafeteria business, their restaurants, into a newly formed company called Unique Casual Restaurants. By the following year, there was already another change. In 1998, the Fuddruckers was sold to King Cannon, a private company owned by a popular figure in the restaurant business named Michael Cannon. The price he paid was $43 million, and he was willing to invest even more money to try to shake things up and bring some life back into the brand. He introduced this rock and roll theme that was quickly adopted by all of the company-owned restaurants. There were updates and renovations. He expanded the menu items, all things that did help bring attention to the brand. But by 2010, things had gone poorly yet again. Now, being a private company during this whole time makes it hard to pinpoint exactly where things took a turn, but I have to think that lower sales from the recession would likely be a big factor here, especially considering that Fuddruckers has always been the more expensive premium alternative to the more popular, cheaper fast food restaurant. I'm just saying, when money is tight and you want a hamburger, you're more likely to go to a place like McDonald's than a place like Fuddruckers. That right there is when they filed for bankruptcy, an event that quickly led to 2 more changes in ownership. Right out of that bankruptcy, their assets were bought for $40 million by a private equity firm called Tavistock. Again, not among the most important changes on the list, because about a month later, those assets were resold. Movies. I have to admit, seems like another good fit. Oddly enough, Movies is known for their cafeteria style food. Coming back to that, they were also